Hi, welcome back to my channel. Thanks for joining me again. Today I'm sharing a card which I've made for this month's Heffy Doodle Challenge. So you can see the details of that over on the Facebook group. But the theme this month is to create a tone on tone project. So I have picked the Hello Squeakheart stamp set, and I'm going to be using the piece of cheese stamp from that to create my own kind of pattern paper background. So what I'm doing at the moment is I am inking it up with some Wild Honey Distress Oxide ink, which is a kind of yellowy orange shade. I've mounted my cheese stamp on an acrylic block and I'm just doing some free range stamping. So basically I am stamping the image repeatedly over the background, and I am turning it around so that the pieces of cheese are stamped in different directions to give it that kind of whimsical, random look. But at the same time, I'm trying to keep a roughly similar amount of space between each image. And then I'm also making sure that some of them go off the side as well, so the whole background gets good coverage. And what I am planning on doing is colouring in my pieces of cheese. And I'm pulling out my hex chart from Sandy Allnock. Now, if you're a Copic colourer and you don't have this chart, I would highly recommend it. It is a really good way of organising your Copic colours into colour groups, so you can see which colours will work well together and blend well together. So using that, I've just picked out 3 colours that I'm going to use here, which are Y17, Y15 and Y13. So Y17 has got that kind of orangey yellow shade. So I'm just starting with that one, which is the darkest of the colours. I'm flicking the colour from the outside of the piece of the cheese into the middle. And then also you'll see that in the holes in the cheese, I'm doing the kind of bottom left edge as well to give an impression of depth. And then moving on to my Y15, and I'm blending inwards, kind of into the piece of cheese, and then following that up with the Y13, which will be my lightest shade. So flicking that pen towards the edge of the piece of cheese means that, as well as blending the colours together, it's kind of fading out nicely into the yellow cardstock background. So I'm not having to colour the entire piece of cheese, I'm actually using the background cardstock as my lightest colour essentially. So I'm just repeating the process across the whole background until all of my pieces of cheese are coloured in. And there you go, that's it. I was quite surprised at myself for choosing this particular pattern because I don't think I've ever made a yellow card before. Yellow isn't really my colour. It's not something I would normally lean towards, but there you go. When I looked through my Heffy Doodle stash, as soon as I saw it, I thought, yeah, that's what I want to do for the Tone on Tone challenge. So there you go. So the next thing I'm doing is a bit of ink blending on a piece of white scrap cardstock. I've got my fossilised amber Distress Oxide, which is also a deeper yellow tone, almost kind of orangey. And I'm doing the most intense application of that towards the bottom of the card and then getting lighter towards the top so it fades out into that white. And then I've grabbed my Hay sentiment die, also from Heffy Doodle, and I've die cut that from the ink blended cardstock, so you get that nice gradual dark yellow and fading into the white at the top. So now I'm just checking how that looks on my background, and I do really like it, but I think I want to make that sentiment stand out a little bit more, especially with it being kind of tone on tone. I don't want it to get lost on that background, so the first thing that I'm doing is die cutting another couple of the Hay sentiments out of white cardstock, and I'm going to stack those on top of each other and then add my ink blended word on the top of those just to give it a bit more dimension. And I'm just using some liquid glue here to stack the die cuts together, This one is the Gina K Connect, which I love. I have no problems with at all. I find it a really nice strong glue. So that is the finished stacked sentiment. But to make it stand out a little bit more on that yellow background, I've decided to create a shadow layer for the sentiment. So I am gluing it here to a piece of adhesive vellum, and I really love this stuff because before I discovered it, it was always that tricky situation of where do I put my glue on the back of the vellum so that it's hidden and it doesn't kind of stick out and be visible from the front. So having that adhesive vellum really kind of gets rid of that problem. So I'm actually creating my own shadow here because the Hay sentiment die doesn't have a shadow die with it, and that's absolutely fine. I'm just using my X-cut scissors to fussy cut around the word, leaving a bit of a gap around it to create a nice shadow, and that was really kind of quick and simple to do. So I'm just popping that sentiment onto the background here. I think that shadow layer and the added dimension behind the die cut has really helped that stand out on the similar coloured background, so I'm pleased with how that's turned out. And now I'm going to stamp one of the little mice from the Hey Squeakheart set, because I'm planning on using one of the sentiments from the set that says Squeakheart, so my card will say Hey Squeakheart. And of course that doesn't really make sense unless you've got a critter that squeaks on your card. So I'm stamping it out here in, I think it's the fossilised amber distress oxide that I've used again here. And the first one didn't really stamp all that well, so I've just done a second. And I'm grabbing a Copic marker just to do some colouring in a similar colour. I think I've gone for Y35 here, which is a nice straw colour. And I'm just adding some detail onto the little mouse, so he's got a patch around his eye. Then off camera, I added some shadow with a W1 marker, which is a very pale, like a warm grey. And then I fussy cut my little mouse out as well. So just moving on to the sentiment now, I've grabbed a piece of black cardstock. I've dusted it with some anti-static powder, and now I'm inking up my sentiment with some embossing ink. I'm going to emboss this in white, and I'm using my favourite embossing powder for that, which is Wow Embossing's Superfine Bright White Powder, which is my go-to for all sentiments because it does such a good job of picking out the detail and keeping it really nice and crisp. So I'm just heat setting that now with my heat gun. And then I'm going to grab a die from my stash to trim down the sentiment. So I'm just popping that on with some washi tape there so it doesn't move. And I'm going to use my Gemini mini die cutting machine to cut this out. I love this mini die cutting machine. I have it on my desk all the time, and it's really, really handy for just smaller die cuts instead of having to go to the full-size Gemini. As you can see, the sentiment is still a little bit dusty from the anti-static powder, so I'm grabbing a baby wipe that's only just wet, and I'm wiping that off there, and it's come up nice and dark now. I'm just trimming it down with my scissors to get it to the right length, and then I'm popping some black foam squares on the reverse of the sentiment. So I stuck this down onto my card and then realised that because the Hey word already had some dimension, then I didn't need one of those foam squares on top of the Y. So actually off camera, I removed that and just used liquid glue on that part of the sentiment, just to make sure it was all nice and level. Now I love how this is turning out, but I've decided just to make that background pop a little bit more, I'm going to trim it down. So I've cut off 1/4 of an inch from every side, and I'm going to pop it on an A2 white card base, and I think that really makes the background just pop that little bit more. I love dimension on my cards, so I've cut down a piece of craft foam, which I'm going to stick to the reverse of my card panel. Again, just using liquid glue, but only a very small amount, because otherwise it can cause warping on your card if it goes on too thick. Again, applying some more liquid glue onto that side so I can then pop this onto my white card base. So my card is nearly done now, but I've decided, just as one final embellishment, to add on some sequins or gems. And I don't want to take away from the tone on tone theme, so I've just gone for some clear bubbles from Studio Katia. So I'm just going to pop those on here, again with a little bit of liquid glue. And I'm using my embellishment wand from, I think it's just from Dovecraft. I think I mentioned it in my previous video. It's nothing special, probably only cost me about £3 when I bought it about 3 years ago, but it has lasted. And it's still picking up the gems really well. So I find that a really helpful tool to have. And that finishes up my card project for today. So I hope you like it, hope you've enjoyed watching this video, and that you'll join me again soon for another card project. Bye!